Imagine a world teetering on the edge of the familiar, a place where the fabric of the everyday begins to unravel, revealing glimpses of the extraordinary lurking beneath. You're about to embark on a journey into the enigmatic, where the peculiar and the perplexing intertwine, where every tale twists the mind and tugs at the spirit. It's a descent into the strange, the mysterious, and the unexplained. This is When Reality Frays. New episodes are published every Monday and Thursday, and When Reality Frays is available everywhere fine podcasts are found. Before we move on, please hit that follow or subscribe button and turn on all reminders so you're alerted when new episodes are released. Today's episode contains 2 stories. First up is the Death Valley Pulse, a tale about mysterious goings-on in one of the harshest places on the planet. And second is The Quantum Mirror, a story about scientific obsession that leads to disaster. Now, let's get to the stories. Death Valley wasn't just a place, it was a raw, gaping scar where the Earth's bones lay exposed under a merciless sky. By day, the sun seared the cracked ground until it shimmered with heat mirages that twisted into half-seen shapes. By night, a predatory cold descended, sharp enough to make breath catch and bones ache, as if the desert itself exhaled frost to remind the living they were intruders. The silence was its own entity, heavy and watchful, broken only by a moaning wind and the occasional skitter of stones that seemed to move without cause. For Dr. Elise Harper, a geophysicist whose career was built on taming the untamable, this desolation was a siren call. But beneath her clinical resolve, a primal instinct whispered that some places were not meant to be known. Her team had come to chase the deep pulse, a phenomena that was as much to Death Valley as its emptiness. Locals spoke of it in furtive murmurs, hikers who felt vibrations clawing up their spines, metallic clangs that echoed from no source, and lights that flickered in the void, leading wanderers astray. Some claimed the ground pulsed like a heartbeat, others that the air grew thick with voices too faint to decipher. Elise, ever the scientist, dismissed the wilder tales as dehydration-fueled delusions, but the consistency of the accounts, spanning decades and defying explanation, was a mystery she couldn't resist. Now, she and a small team armed with seismographs, microphones, and thermal cameras aimed to dispel the ghost stories with hard scientific data. Yet as their jeep rattled deeper into the valley, the horizon seemed to tilt, the stars dimming as if the sky itself recoiled. Their camp sat at the edge of a dry wash, a cluster of tents dwarfed by towering dunes that loomed like frozen waves. Sarah, the seismologist, fidgeted with her glasses, her eyes darting to the shadows. Ben, the audio technician, masked his nerves with forced jokes, his laughter brittle. Thomas, the field assistant, chewed tobacco, his weathered gaze scanning the horizon as if he had seen too much in his years to trust the quiet. They set up their equipment under a moonless sky, the monitor's glow casting long, writhing shadows that seemed to linger too long before retreating. The first sign came just past midnight when the air grew taut. Elise froze, her coffee mug paused near her lips. A faint tremor rippled beneath her boots, so subtle it might have been her imagination. But it returned, stronger, a rhythmic throb that seemed to rise from the Earth's core. "Anyone else feel that?" she asked, her voice barely cutting through the oppressive silence. Sarah's breath hitched. "It is like a heartbeat." The word landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the team. The tremor deepened, a pulse so visceral it thrummed in their chests, syncing with their heartbeats until they couldn't tell where their bodies ended and the earth began. It wasn't just vibration, it seemed intentional. a cadence that felt like the stirring of something vast and ancient, something that had slumbered for eons and now stirred at their presence. Elise's excitement canceled out a sensation of creeping dread, her scientist's mind scrambling for an explanation. Geothermal surges, microquakes, while the primitive part of her being told her to run. The equipment erupted into chaos. Seismographs scratched jagged, frenzied lines as if tracing the ravings of a fevered mind. Microphones captured a low, oscillating hum woven with sharp, metallic clangs, each one precise, deliberate, like a hammer striking an anvil in some forgotten forge. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost ritualistic, as if the desert were chanting a litany older than humanity. Ben's fingers fumbled over the controls, his bravado gone, his face pale as bone. "This ain't right," he whispered. "It's like something's talking." The ground began to undulate, not shake, not crack, but ripple, as though the earth had turned to liquid beneath a thin crust. Stones skittered in eerie patterns, forming fleeting, spiraling shapes before scattering. Dust rose in spectral tendrils, catching the starlight and twisting into forms that seemed almost human, yet almost wrong. Elise knelt, pressing her palm to the ground. It was fever hot, pulsing faintly, as if blood flowed beneath the surface. Her breath quickened, her mind raced. Tectonic anomalies, gas vents, anything to tether this to reality. But the rhythm was too perfect, too alive. Then came the lights. Among the dunes, faint bluish glows flickered, like embers of a dying fire. They pulsed in sync with the hum, darting and weaving with a grace that defied any of the team's experiences. Elise's flashlight beam cut through the dark, and she aimed it toward them. But the lights vanished under scrutiny, only to reappear at the edges of her vision, taunting and circling. They weren't just lights, they had form, amorphous and shifting, like mist woven with purpose. Some seemed to stretch upward, others to slink low, their movements suggesting coordination, but what could be controlling them? "Stay together," Elise ordered, her voice taut. The team clustered, their flashlights carving frail paths through a darkness that seemed to push back. The air grew charged, static crackling along their skin and making their hair stand on end. The hum grew louder, its clangs sharper, each one a physical blow that made their skulls throb. A deafening crack split the night, louder than a cannon, closer than their own shadows. A metal stake anchoring a microphone tore free, the ground beneath it fracturing into a jagged fissure that exhaled a sulfurous stench. Rotting eggs laced with something older, metallic like blood, long spilled. The team stumbled back, choking on the fumes, their eyes streaming. Elise's mind clung to logic. Volcanic gas or a natural vent. But the fissure's edges glistened, wet and pulsing as if it were a wound. The hum became a roar, its rhythm frantic, almost enraged. The ground shuddered violently, toppling monitors and snapping cables. The lights surged closer, their glow now a sickly green, casting the desert in a fever dream hue that made the dunes look like the flanks of some vast sleeping beast. The shapes within the lights grew clearer, tall and elongated, their edges fraying into tendrils that reached and recoiled. They moved in a manner that chilled the blood, circling the camp like wolves sizing up prey. The temperature plummeted. The desert's cold night turned Arctic in an instant, frost blooming across equipment with a crackling hunger. Delicate fractal crystals spread over metal, glass, even the team's clothing glinting like eyes in the dim light. Elise's breath fogged, each inhale a blade in her lungs. Her flashlight flickered, its beam thinning to a thread, then dying. The others' lights followed, plunging them into a twilight broken only by the pulsing glow of those things, now so close their light cast shadows that didn't match the team's shapes. A new sound rose from the fissure, a guttural, bone-deep rumble, less a sound than a force, bypassing ears to resonate in their marrow. It carried weight and malice, a voice that wasn't a voice, but a command. The team froze, their gazes locked on the fissure. Something moved below, a shadow against the faint, unnatural glow that seeped from the crack. It wasn't solid, not liquid, but something in between. Smoke given form, rippling upward with a slow, deliberate grace that suggested awareness. Its edges pulsed, fraying into tendrils that seemed to taste the air. "What the hell is that?" Tom's voice was a broken thing, his hand trembling on his knife. No one answered. The shadow swelled, stretching impossibly tall, its form a void that drank the light. It towered over the fissure, its presence a physical weight that squeezed their chests and made their knees weak. Elise's mind screamed to run, hide, survive, but her body was paralyzed by a terror older than instinct. The air was heavy with a scent like ozone and decay, and the stars above seemed to dim, though it was a perfectly clear night. Ben broke and sprinted for the vehicles. His gasps were swallowed by the night, and his footsteps faltered as if the ground itself resisted him. The shadow shifted, its tendrils coiling outward. There was a strangled shout of fear from the direction Ben had run, and he didn't respond when Elise and Thomas shouted his name. The lights pulsed faster, their glow now a livid purple, casting the desert in a hue that made reality feel thin, like a veil about to tear. The roar became a cacophony, a chorus of clangs and whispers that seemed to form words just beyond comprehension. Elise's vision blurred, her thoughts fragmenting. Were those voices? Were they hers? Then, silence. The roar stopped, the lights vanished, the shadow dissolved, leaving only the fissure's glistening scar. The ground stilled, the frost melted, dripping like tears from the equipment. The sulphurous stench faded, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of the desert at night. The stars returned, brighter now, but their light felt cold, judgmental. The team stood panting, their flashlights flickering back to life as if mocking their fear. Elise charged in the direction Ben had taken, the rest of the team falling in behind her. They found Ben, unconscious but seemingly unharmed, near the Jeep. He didn't respond to their voices or touch. They quickly loaded him into the vehicle. Elise stayed with him while Thomas and Sarah ran back to collect their equipment. Ben regained consciousness before they returned, suddenly sitting straight up and grasping Elise's wrist in an iron grip. Looking closely, she was terrified to see pinpricks of blue light swirling deep in his eyes. "They want to go home," Ben said in a monotone, his gaze unfocused as if seeing something that defied shape or form. "What?" Elise blurted. "Who wants to go home?" Ben's head swiveled to face her, but before he could answer, the blue pinpricks vanished from his eyes. For a moment he looked at Elise in incomprehension, then began weeping. He was still racked with grief when Thomas and Sarah returned. They began to ask questions, but Elise silenced them with 5 words, punctuated by Ben's sobs. "We need to go, now." The equipment they'd collected, much of it damaged, was dumped in the back of the Jeep, then they piled in. The engine roared as Thomas pushed hard to get away from whatever they'd encountered as quickly as possible. Elise glanced back as they sped away, her heart lurching. For just a moment, she saw a faint blue pulse in the distance, like a laser pointed straight up into the night sky. Then it was gone, and only the desert stared back, empty and eternal, its secrets buried deep. At their base camp, miles away, Elise asked Ben what had happened to him. What did he mean by they want to go home? Who or what were they? Ben couldn't answer. He had no memory of anything after the fissure in the earth had cracked open. Exhausted, he zipped himself into a sleeping bag and didn't stir until the next day. Elise, Thomas, and Sarah pored over the surviving data, their hands trembling. Seismographs showed spikes that defied physics, rising and falling in patterns that resembled a code. Audio files held distorted frequencies that made their ears ache when played, braided with whispers in no known language looping endlessly. Thermal cameras captured heat signatures that moved against the wind, formless shapes that could have been anything. One frame, frozen at the peak of the event, showed the fissure glowing, and within it, something tall and blurry for which she had no explanation. An hour later, the camp asleep, Elise sat alone by the dying fire, her notebook untouched. The scientist in her screamed to return, explore what had happened to her and the team. But another part, the part that still felt the weight of the night's events, knew better. She tossed a log into the fire, watching the sparks spiral into the night. Watched the embers swirl into a cohesive pattern, then change color to the blue of the pinpricks that had invaded Ben's eyes. The lights drew closer, orbiting Elise, who had lapsed into a trance. They whispered to her, beckoning. Rising, she followed them into the darkness. When they woke the following morning, Sarah and Thomas were alarmed to find no signs of Elise. They were 30 miles from the closest outpost of civilization, and she was on foot in a place with the harshest climate in North America. Rousting Ben, they drove to the location of the previous evening's event, finding no trace of her. With rising panic, Thomas used the team's satellite phone to call the park rangers. By mid-afternoon, the search had begun. Rangers on horseback and ATVs. The state police contributed a helicopter and troopers in four-wheel drive trucks. But no trace of Elise has ever been found. Ben still has no memory of what happened, and even after hypnoregression therapy is unable to recall anything. Elise Harper is gone, vanished into the night as if claimed by the very pulse she sought to capture. Her team, left with shattered equipment and fragmented memories, can offer no answers, only questions and the haunting echo of whispers in a language not meant for human ears. Was it the earth itself that spoke, or something older? Perhaps something from another place that waits beneath the dunes, its patience as vast as the stars it dims. If you're enjoying the stories, please support the podcast by buying me a coffee. The link is in the episode show notes, and I would greatly appreciate your support. Now, on to today's second story, which is The Quantum Mirror. Picture a laboratory, its concrete walls a silent witness to the ambitions of a man named Dr. Kenji Sato. A physicist, he stands before a mirror that is no mirror at all, rather a gateway to worlds unseen and unthinkable. In this sterile chamber, where shadows move with a life of their own, Sato prepares to challenge the very fabric of reality. But in the pursuit of knowledge, there are doors best left unopened, thresholds best left uncrossed. For Dr. Sato and for the world beyond these walls, the clock is ticking down to a time when reality frays. In 2011, an innocuous-appearing laboratory sat on the fringes of Tokyo's industrial sprawl, its weathered facade scarred by decades of acid rain and neglect. The city's neon arteries bright beyond its walls, their electric glow a stark contrast to the lab's somber gloom. Blacked-out windows, sealed with heavy curtains, betrayed no hint of the work unfolding within. The air was sterile, dry and cold, saturated with the weight of theories that tugged at the edges of sanity. Dr. Kenji Sato, a physicist whose thin frame and hollowed eyes bore the toll of a decade spent chasing the impossible, stood at the lab's heart. His silhouette was a fragile thing against the machine that consumed his soul. The Mirror Protocol, his magnum opus, was no mere experiment. It was a rebellion against reality itself, a desperate bid to tear open the veil between worlds, to touch the parallel realities his equations swore existed. The room was a mausoleum of fluorescence, their sickly yellow light casting shadows that slithered across the concrete walls, too sharp, too deliberate, as if they knew what was coming. The mirror was the experiment's core. It was a 7-foot oval of quantum-engineered alloy, its surface neither solid nor liquid, but a shimmering pool of energy that rippled as if a stone had been dropped into a pond. Encircling it was a labyrinth of technology. Crystalline conduits pulsing with light, wires woven through a skeletal frame, and diodes flickering in ever-changing patterns as if mapping a cosmos no telescope could see. The machine was Sato's creation, forged from equations that twisted reality into knots. Formulas that suggested worlds were time-folded, space warped, and the laws of physics as he knew them didn't seem to exist. Each component had been crafted with obsessive precision to support the quantum alloy, a material that oscillated between states so rapidly the changes were undetectable to all but the most sensitive instruments. The quantum alloy, developed in secret over years, vibrated at the edge of existence, its atoms dancing between this world and others. Sato's equations, scrawled in notebooks that filled the lab's shelves, promised a glimpse, perhaps even a doorway into parallel realities. But they also whispered of dangers, instabilities, ruptures, realities bleeding into one another, their boundaries failing like a straw hut in a typhoon. Sato's colleagues, once allies in this pursuit, had fled weeks ago, their faces ashen with a fear they dared not speak. But he remained, solitary and driven by a compulsion that felt less like ambition and more like a summons. Now, his hands trembled as he prepared the machine for its final test. The lab's clock, a stark fixture bolted to the wall, read 1:47 a.m. Tokyo slumbered beyond the sealed walls, its millions of residents oblivious to the wound Sato was about to inflict on their world. The control panel glowed under his fingers, its dials and switches a language only he spoke, each adjustment a step closer to the abyss. Sato activated the machine, his movements precise despite a palsy in his hands and the weight of a decade's obsession on his shoulders. The conduits flared, bathing the lab in a light that cast shadows that bent against the laws of geometry. The mirror shivered, its surfaces warping, edges dissolving into the black tungsten frame. Pressure built, not sound, but a force that seemed to grasp Sato's heart and squeeze until his breaths were shallow, desperate gasps. The room's shadows deepened, pooling in corners like liquid ink, their edges curling toward the mirror as if summoned. The fluorescence flickered, their rhythm syncing with the machine's pulse, a heartbeat that shook the concrete floor, cracking tiles into jagged veins. Sato stepped closer, his reflection in the mirror fracturing into a kaleidoscope of cells, some his, others alien, their eyes too wide, their limbs bending at angles that mocked bone and sinew. His pulse thundered a frantic drumbeat in the silence as the mirror ceased to reflect the lab. In its place, a city emerged, alien and vast. Its spires of impossible geometry twisted like living things, their surfaces slick with an oily sheen that caught no light. The sky above was starless, a blackness that pressed against the glass, a presence that stared with unblinking intent. The city pulsed, its towers bending inward, their tips converging. Their forms were etched with hypnotic patterns that shifted, pulling at his mind like a tide dragging a ship to ruin. Frost crept up the lab's walls, tracing glowing veins that pulsed in time with the mirror's light. The lab's heaters ran without pause, their efforts futile against the cold bleeding out from the mirror. Sato's shadow, cast by the machine's glow, twitched against the floor, no longer his own. It stretched unnaturally tall, its edges fraying into tendrils that curled toward the mirror. He froze, his body a statue of dread, as the shadow moved without him, gliding across the room with a grace that was inhuman. Its form sharpened into a silhouette with no face, only a lightless void where eyes should be. The city in the mirror surged, its spires now closer, the runes burning into Sato's vision, each glyph seemingly an angry assault against him. He reached out, instinct overriding terror. His fingers trembled, inches from the rippling surface of the mirror, drawn by a force he could neither name nor resist. The shadow lunged, a claw bursting from the mirror to seize his wrist. Its grip was immeasurably cold, an assault that seared through muscle, bone, and soul. Terror gripped Sato and he punched an emergency shutdown button with his free hand. The lab plunged into darkness, the machine's lights extinguished, the only illumination coming from the mirror that was no longer a mirror. It was a Terran reality, the city beyond still filling the frame. The shadow spilled into the room, a faceless wraith standing between him and the mirror. Stumbling back, Sato's shoes slipped on frost-slicked tiles. The floor buckled, cracks splintering through the concrete. The lab's walls rippled, their surfaces bending and the boundaries of the room dissolving into a haze where shapes moved, half seen, their forms neither human nor animal. Sato tried to flee, but his toe caught on a tile that shifted beneath his feet, and he crashed to the floor. Fear tore through him when he saw the door was gone, replaced by a wall that pulsed with the same light as the mirror. Scrambling to his feet, he gasped to see that the shadow was now everywhere, its edges bleeding into the dark recesses of corners as its form multiplied and encircled him. Sato glanced at the mirror, horrified to see thousands more shadows flitting through the alien city, all of them coming directly toward the portal he had opened. He had to break the connection before they reached his world. He lunged for an electrical panel, hand wrapping around the main disconnect an instant before the shadow enveloped him like a cloak. Fire as cold and piercing as ice burned through his body, and he screamed. His body began to unravel, strings of molecules being ripped away to dissolve into the quantum alloy. His final act was to pull the disconnect lever on the electrical panel as he collapsed to the shattered floor. He lay there, his face a rictus of pain and terror. Then, in a burst of light, his body vanished in a swirl of energy that was drawn into the mirror. A scream tore through the room, the quantum alloy resonating beyond its frame, its frequencies ripping at the shadows. The mirror pulsed, the scream ascending as quantum energy fed back on itself. The lab snapped back for an instant, the machine dead, the mirror blank, its surface unmarred, reflecting only the empty room with cracked tiles and scarred walls. The building vibrated as the now unstable quantum alloy reached critical mass. A scream like 1,000 dental drills bore into everything, fracturing steel and stone equally. A pause, silence for a heartbeat. Then the pent-up energy was released all at once. The lab vanished in less than the blink of an eye, leaving a gaping hole in the ground and fracturing the deep bedrock to a depth of more than 8 miles. The earth stirred, a fault awakened by the incalculable energy release. On March 11th, the Tohoku earthquake tore through Japan's northeast, its epicenter far from Tokyo. The quantum breach, a tear in reality's skin, released energies deep in the planet, destabilizing faults with a precision no natural force could match. The quake, magnitude 9.0, shook the Tohoku region, its tremors rippling through the sea, birthing a tsunami that swallowed the coast. The Fukushima Daiichi reactors, battered beyond their design, failed, their cores melting, their radiation bleeding into the air, the soil, and the sea. A wound that would scar the world for generations. The quantum accident, triggered by Sato's experiment, had reached through space and time, its frequencies twisting the Earth's bones, its legacy a disaster cloaked in the guise of nature's wrath. Dr. Kenji Sato, a man who sought to peer beyond the veil of existence, now vanished, swallowed by the very mirror he created, a mirror that reflected not just light, but the infinite shadows of worlds we were never meant to know. His experiment ignited a chain of events that shook the earth and scarred the future with the wounds of Fukushima, reminding us the price of hubris is often paid in silence. The stories presented are inspired by true events. Names and locations may have been changed for privacy reasons. New episodes are uploaded every Monday and Thursday. If you're enjoying the journey into the strange, the mysterious, and the unexplained, be sure to press that follow or subscribe button and turn on all reminders so you're alerted whenever an episode drops. Until next time, thank you for listening to When Reality Frays.